Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Namaste, hello everyone. Welcome back to the NPTEL course, Role of Craft and Technology in Interior Architecture. Today we are going to discuss module number 35, which is the summary of all the modules that we have discussed, focusing on the continuity and revival of craft. So we'll be just having a summary part to it, and we'll be discussing what all we have done so far. So just to put things in perspective, what all we have done, in the previous four modules or lectures, I have just put a list of all of this. So we talked about the research and documentation perspective while we were discussing about the continuity and revival part, specifically talking about the building crafts. And we also talked about the education and training perspective. Then we had a discussion on innovation and development perspective, and finally we also discussed about the resource building and dissemination part. And while we were talking about all these perspectives, we saw several examples and which were mentioned, in one or the other way. So we talked about UNESCO, we talked about the ICRC at CEPT University, we talked about IIT Roorkee. We also saw some guidelines from ICOMOS. We talked about the National Innovation Council and SEM Pitroda's work, and we saw the Jaipur portfolio. Then we also saw the album of interior decoration and ornament. There was a mention of building technology heritage library. So we saw all this during our previous sessions, and I'll just flip over and just explain briefly what all we did. So for the research and documentation perspective, we started with this framework given by UNESCO, where there is this identification of cultural domains and where art and craft also is identified as a significant domain. And then we saw a lot of importance being given to education and training, archiving and preserving. So we are talking about research and documentation and archiving and preserving. We also talk about education and training. So all these domains, their activities, and the focus on the documentation part and the archiving and the preservation part has been given by UNESCO. So we saw this framework. We also saw a lot of work done by the ICRC, and we saw this institutional framework of actions that they have developed and the modus operandi, where they have highlighted these important set of actions. So, identifying the scenarios in the context of craft, then collaborating, then the interaction part, initiating the interaction and then demonstrations and discussions. The recording part, so where the documentation of course falls into picture, the investigation part, where there is inquiry about the specific craft forms, the analysis part, so generating an understanding and developing new perspectives, and further the exposure part. So there is this collaborative platform where people come together and then there is exposure to everyone. Then the ideation part, brainstorming part, then the creation part. So the creation and co-creation and the new prototypes coming in. Also to evaluate, so the assessment and the evaluation of all the activities, which gives a reality check. The dissemination, of course, the very important part. We also discussed this in the previous module. So exchanging this information, disseminating it, letting it flow, letting it grow. And of course the connecting part, where the connections are established and the network is established, and there is a sort of collaboration that happens between different people. So these are the set of actions that they do. And while again talking about research and documentation, they also follow this model of research which we discussed, which is a step-by-step process starting from survey to the resource building and dissemination part. And also some key projects were highlighted. So that's how we try to understand their working. We saw a lot of these slides already, so I'm just flipping through them. So how the work is done on site, and also the use of technology and mobile apps and tablets which have been programmed, and the data is recorded on site, and then it's fed into a system like this where one could just put some checklists and then try to come up with the required set of data with certain keywords and certain search optimization tools and things like that. So they do that kind of research and documentation activities. We also saw under the documentation work done on the site, and then the creation of the monographs and booklets and pamphlets like these. Further work, the SWOT analysis which they do, and the kind of documentation which is created along with the analysis part, we saw that. Also the resource building part, we were talking about the building craft laboratory. So a certain craft form is selected, the cluster is identified, they go to the community, they again create this very important significant set of data, and then it's put on the online portal which is available for everyone. So those kinds of activities. And again the resource building part, we saw these resource inventories which are put up. So different kinds of books, different kinds of data generation that happens over there, the building mapping that happens. So all of it is available again, the building craft laboratory is there online, and this resource building is taken care through that. So again, model of documentation. So again from field visit all the way till resource building, they have this set of step-by-step activities which is now a sort of a framework which they follow as a system, and then there are certain projects through which these actions and activities are highlighted. So field visit, going on the field, discussing with the people who are native and then learning from them, and again creating this rich repository, documenting, putting data online. Then again here through drawings, through documentation, whether it's a visual documentation, through photography or through sketching or through drawings. There are different tools that are employed, and then these drawings on site which are finally converted into technical drawings, and they are a part of this rich portfolio again. So from research and documentation to analysis to this portfolio creation which is there for dissemination, all of these activities are done. So analysis I was just mentioning. So analysis also we discussed about it at length earlier. And so resource building part, the portfolio and the digital plates and panels that I was mentioning, that's also created. And talking about IIT Roorkee now, because we have already discussed all this, I'm just visually flipping through them and just telling the keywords what all we already covered. Field visits and developing the route maps, that's how for this project Dharohar the team had worked, and we created these route maps. So very interesting routes, the identified interior architecture, build forms and craft forms, and all these, mapping them, documenting them, and then creating these interesting, followed by surveys, interviews, and the focus group discussions. So we discussed about this questionnaire which is taken on the site, and a lot of questions are asked to all these communities and craft persons, and a lot of information is generated through this. And it also helps in creating a directory, because a cluster is visited, the names of craft persons are recorded, their demographics, their all the details, everything. So that is generated, plus some other data if required, extra sheets are used. So, and these kinds of interviews with the different stakeholders who are working in different capacities, and government, non-government, individuals, organizations, that is done. So all of it is the part of the research and documentation, identification of the cluster and why is it significant. Again, the different clusters which are already covered under certain schemes which are highlighted, and they reinforce the relevance of studying them and documenting them. So base work like that, background research like that. again, so creating the directory and creating the list of the craft persons whom we contact and then collaborate with and create a network, that kind of data generation. And during the interviews and focus group discussions, again there is a mention of certain clusters and certain craft forms and certain important pointers which are taken a note of, and then further they are put up on record for later projects to take them, or maybe some of the information which is related to the ongoing project, that is then tabbed. So that kind of documentation. And very interestingly, we also document through visual narratives, and we create a lot of illustrations and sketches, and there is a team that works on that kind of activity. So we have all these visual narratives documenting the creative cultural industries of Uttarakhand, and we just try to very visually and aesthetically document, of course along with the other details which are like the body of text in the monographs or the reports or the presentations that we make. So again, also documenting the step-by-step process, how a certain art and craft work is done, those kinds of significant details. So here it is the woodwork and the baguette work, so all those details. And this is the weaving, we saw all of this earlier. And this is the copper craft, so documenting the copper craft, the kinds of tools, the entire process, how it is done, documenting all that. This is ringal, the dwarf bamboo which is found in Uttarakhand. So here everything is in focus, material, tools, technique, the process which is step by step, and then documenting it very visually and also writing the details about it through text and diagrams and other ways. Then of course identifying the relevant case studies and mapping them is a very important part of the research and documentation process. And so this is the documentation that we see, and we discussed about them in detail already. Again, some elements, different kinds of doors, and even the repositories like that, which gives details on the space making elements. Then the observation and analysis, of course, very simple analysis at what eye level, what kind of details and motifs are seen, what color palette, and the reference to the original motifs and what is seen in the current residences, how old are these, are they original or are they redone, and things like that. Those kinds of analysis are done. Then of course finally the technical drawing, so that a portfolio could be made. And we have the resource building, and we create these important references. So the drawing is done, and the right from the plan, elevation section to also the furniture details, and all those details are documented. Also the local parlance and what is the vocabulary used in the region, and details like that. Now talking about the education and training perspective, again I'll be just flipping over what all we saw. So we started by discussing some guidelines which are given by ICOMOS, and they specifically focus on the education and training part, especially talking about the field of conservation, where craft is a very important focus. So we could understand through these guidelines given by ICOMOS that traditional crafts are a valuable cultural resource, and that the historic skills will have to be recorded and revived. So they talk about the continuity and revival, and recording and research and documentation is a very important part of this process. So what all exists is recorded and then disseminated, and then the skills are enhanced through training. So they emphasize a lot on the practical training, which allows the persons associated to craft fields and trades to master technical execution. And there's a lot of discussion on the capacity building part, and there's a mention of craft and craft persons and conservationists, architects, and how the coming together of all of these different stakeholders matters a lot. So we saw all these guidelines and important organizations and individuals talking about all these different perspectives, which help us take this important aspect of continuity and revival forward and to do something about it. So again, education and training perspective, we discuss certain workshops which are done at IIT Roorkee very regularly, and we talked about the approach, how the workshop is conducted. The focus is on material, and specifically there are 4 modules. So there is awareness through the expert lecture. A very prominent focus is on the hands-on exposure to understand the material, to touch it, to work with it. Then conceptual development and brainstorming, and then eventually there is a prototype development, either on a small scale or on a life size scale, and where there's some sort of craft design process employed, which creates certain interesting value additions to the already existing products or prototypes. And sort of design brief is also given to the stakeholders, students and the professionals who come for the conducting the workshop, plus other professionals and faculty members who are interested. So that's how this framework has been developed, and a lot of workshops have been done. So I'll be just flipping over. This was papier mâché. So the process again, and the different steps, how it is done, what are the different ingredients and the components, and then the different techniques. So the armature technique and the mold technique and different techniques, we have already discussed that in detail. The prototypes that get made, and some interesting explorations, also some conceptual development and some drawings which give the technical details. So that kind of documentation and education and training perspective is what we take into account. And then again, sort of compilation of all the activities that are done in the workshop, starting from scratch to the end, so that there is again a resource building and dissemination part attached to it, which is very important. So that and so many other workshops which are done, few of them have been enlisted and discussed already. So this was terracotta, so majorly focusing on a particular material, the tools and techniques related to it, the process employed while making certain prototypes within it, and how we could understand that material and making within the larger context of space making. So again, we were talking about building crafts during all the workshops predominantly. So again, the methods and learning the material, the test, the plasticity test over here, the tools and the processes involved, again concept development, and certain prototypes that get made. All of these which are also exhibited along with the collages and posters and panels. So all of these details, that is what is followed. So we saw all these details in the earlier modules. We also saw some work done by the ICRC, and within the education and training perspective, they also do a lot of workshops, and there is a lot of collaborative craft design process that is employed. A lot of stakeholders come in, they contribute, there is knowledge sharing, and there is experimentation, there is making, there is doing, and there is of course dissemination through exhibitions and outputs. And again, there is a resource building creation where the concept developments are also shared along with the final output. And there are a lot of craft design groups that are created which have different stakeholders, and they work together to come up with certain results. And that's also a collaborative platform and learning, and the training part, innovation part. So all of that gets taken care of, and then some final prototypes are made. This is again a final prototype over here with this team which worked together. Again over here. So some interesting joinery, learning the material. Then the groups that are formed, details about that, a kind of rapport that they build among themselves, they work together, and then they finally exhibit their works, which is disseminated. So again, another one that we saw in one of their works, and we were talking about the plates and posters and portfolios. All that is done, which is the outcome of these workshops and collaborative exercises. Some more panels over here that we see. Again, some more panels, some more prototypes which are demonstrated live. You could just go and see them there. Some of them are in the exhibition part. Then we came to the innovation and development perspective, and we again saw some works and examples. We discussed the decade of innovations, and we also discussed the roadmap which has been created by Sam Pitroda and the National Innovation Council, We also saw some interesting diagrams explaining the craft design collaborations and how they are important tools for innovation and development. So we saw this roadmap for innovation for 2010-2020. It has this exhaustive list that we have already discussed, and we discussed several innovation opportunities, and we tried to understand how they are, the lot of permutations and combinations can bring a lot of opportunities for innovation. And we also understood the frugal innovation and India's strength in creating frugal innovation, plus this interesting shift from a knowledge producing economy to a knowledge sharing society. All that we had discussed about. And we saw this innovation strategy, a very significant discussion which is happening in India through different platforms. And this important strategy which has these 5 nodes, creating platform, encouraging inclusion, creating ecosystem, identifying and generating drivers for change and innovation, and then having discourse which helps establishing an understanding and also disseminating all these discussions that get generated and knowledge that gets shared. So we saw this, and we saw these very interesting craft design collaboration processes where the artisan and designers work together. There is a shared knowledge, and right from the fuzzy end of certain ideas, there is a certain final product or prototype which is generated towards the end through this collaboration that we see over here. And again, adding to this diagram, this interesting layer where there is sketching, discussing, prototyping, presenting. Again, this contributes to this interesting process of creating shared knowledge and then generating certain interesting results or value adding to already existing results. So we saw all these interesting processes and interesting collaborations, and we also understood design intervention, how it is important to have knowledge import and knowledge export and different stakeholders who work together. So all these interesting discussions we have been having so far, I have put things to just summarize. Continuing the innovation and development perspective, then we went on to see some works done by DICRC, and again they have this model for their craft innovation workshops, and this is the framework that they follow, the step-by-step thing. And then we also saw some key projects. So this is how they do it, and we also saw the step-by-step process. What is their collaboration model, how do they work together, and what is the set of different activities that they do when it is the mention of model of craft innovation studio. So there's a collaboration, and then there's this entire process, and then finally there is a sort of a network and connect that they established. So we discussed that in detail, and we saw some work, of course, done by IIT Roorkee, where we mentioned the idea of this design hub, which was an ideation state, and I have been mentioning it that it's not really executed, but we tried to understand this very interesting process, where there was this creation of partnerships, and there was also a development of new paradigms for pedagogy and entrepreneurship, then strengthening the already established design related skills that are there within the campus through different stakeholders, plus also adding new scenarios to it. And then these two sides to this framework work hand in hand, and then there is some sort of resource generation, new prototypes development, and things like that. So we discussed this model in detail earlier. Talking about the resource building and dissemination perspective, that we saw in great detail in the very previous module itself. So I'll just summarize that. So we were talking how important is to not just document and research, but also to create repositories and disseminate, because if there is so much effort which goes into the research and documentation part, going on the site, doing survey and generating a lot of data and information, but if they are not preserved and archived and presented well, and if they are not disseminated, then the purpose is defeated. So it's very important that the resources are created, repositories are created, and there is a proper method to dissemination, so that more and more information reaches, and it is accessible to a lot of people, so that a lot of people can plug in more data and relevant set of information. So we saw the very exquisite plates from the Jaipur portfolio and the details that are covered within that. So we saw all these wall decorations and surface decorations. We saw certain drawings on scale. We saw the motifs and the different geometry that are followed. And we also then saw the Building Technology Heritage Library, how it is a very important online source which gives so many different catalogs and books covering so many different subjects and detailed aspects related to craft and interior architecture. Especially the building trade catalog part is very significant, where these catalogs give, lot of information, be it standards or be it the technique of making or be it the information on different kinds of materials. So all that resource building has been done by this online cataloging portal. So different books and catalogs. Identifying the relevant literature is also a very important part of the process. I mean, the repository could not be created without putting a lot of effort in identifying the relevant sources and allowing those contributions, and to put things, in a very organized way on a portal or in a hard copy catalog and, different mediums. So that way they have done a very good job, and there are a lot of details that are present. Again, a consolidated summary that you see on the slide. There are different kinds of books and catalogs which we see on this portfolio, this side and this side. So this is how we discussed the resource building and dissemination part, and then we moved on to the album of interior decoration and ornament, and we were seeing the works of the artist Jean Lepotre, and we could understand the significant contributions made and the catalog that he has created, the different elements which have been put together and which are there as references, be it the space or a particular element, a wall surface design or a mirror design or a spatial design. So those kinds of details we saw in this catalog, which is there in the collection of a lot of different museums, very popular museums. Again, we saw DICRC's work where they focus on the resource building aspect, and we saw all the plates and the portfolios that have been done. And we also saw this model of knowledge dissemination, where we see these important nodes which eventually contribute to resource building, and finally the dissemination happens through different mediums. We saw this model, we saw different frameworks which have been adopted by the ICRC and other organizations, also IIT Roorkee, how they work. And we saw as the resource building and dissemination part, they do these significant set of activities, mapping, cataloging, creating directory, and then the documentation which plugs into all of these important outcomes. And we also understood that they have this building craft lab, and I have been repeatedly suggesting that you go have a look at it. So there are different users, who for whom the data which is generated by them is useful. Plus there is also a set of data producers, like people like us who could plug into the data, and then it is all managed through different individuals and stakeholders. So that's the model which is followed. And again, some more resource building part, how they create this repository. And we saw some IIT Roorkee work where they focus on the resource building and dissemination part. And very visually we just saw some projects and how the repository is created and how the works are disseminated through media, through different monographs, through different publications, research papers, through some exhibitions, through some online portfolios. Also through word of mouth, when people come for a certain seminar or workshop or project discussion or brainstorming, there are a lot of people, a lot of stakeholders who come together. There is networking, there is data discussion, knowledge sharing, data generation, and then the knowledge transfer happens. So that's how the resource building and the dissemination part is taken care of. So again, this is a part of an exhibition which was put up at CEPT, this panel. and again some works done and put up as exhibition panels. These are some pages and jacket covers from a monograph where the creative and cultural industries of Uttarakhand are documented very visually through illustrations. Again, the brainstorming and exhibition and discussion part, we have already discussed that in great detail. The publications that I was mentioning, so reputed platforms putting up the work there, opening it up for discussion and feedback, and some chapters in the books, again getting some feedback and critical reviews, contributing to the encyclopedia, and going to remote areas and villages and documenting the material, the activities, their lifestyle, and different details of the building craft. So all of these, and then putting them into exhibition panels and some digital plates, also trying to document agriculture, their food, and what is the life that surrounds the communities, all those kinds of details. Of course, the interior architecture, space making elements, and then creating plates out of it. So these details we saw in the previous module, and again the art forms, the timber craft, different case studies which are identified, the residences that are documented, some illustrations and visual narratives, and how they get exhibited, and they are also a part of certain monograph series, and that's how it takes care of the dissemination part. Some more monographs and some courses that are conducted, which again discuss about some important interdisciplinary aspects, talking about craft, architecture, art, design. And it's quite amazing that MHRD is really recognizing such courses, and the Gyan course that you see here and the NPTEL course that is happening again is a testimony to the encouragement that the ministry is giving. And again, more resource creation, some project proposals, some studio works done by students, creating a visual repository, creating reports and details, creating documentaries. That's very interesting. So due to the shortage of time, I can't really play a documentary over here, but some of them I think are already there on YouTube. Students have put up their work, so you could see that. So this was a very important module where we were talking about continuity and revival, and I have just tried to summarize this as briefly as possible because there was so much to discuss while talking about research and documentation, education and training, innovation and development, and finally the resource building and dissemination. But you could discuss more, go through the references. In the next module, we are going to talk about interventions, and we'll see different types of interventions which could be possibly discussed, and we'll focus on the next module on the process based interventions. So we'll have a discussion on that, and let's see some references. So these are the consolidated references of all the previous 4 modules, plus of course some common references which we are seeing since the first lecture. So the list is like this. Thank you.